Time for Business End, starting in the US. Growth seen a surprise drop.
Yeah, down 0.1%. A surprise to economists who they were expecting a small amount of growth. For the first time since 2009, if we take a look at how the figures have worked out over the last couple of years, and not been helped by weak exports, actually. That's thought to be partly, of course, due to the problems that Europe's having, meaning less demand for US exports, but mainly due to a sharp drop in military spending, down 22% in the last quarter of 2012.
It's quite surprising, isn't it? In military spending, the US still active in places like Afghanistan for now, anyway.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, there has been the end of the surge there, but the US is still, like you say, very much active in Afghanistan. It's partly to do with just general accounting principles, because the last quarter of the year financially is the third quarter in the US for the government, and it's thought that the government departments like to spend their remaining budgets so that in the next year of funding, Congress doesn't say, well, you didn't spend that money, you don't need it, we'll take it away from you next year. So Q3 traditionally does see a burst in spending, and Q4 in comparison does see a drop. But this year that was particularly marked. That might be because of the fiscal cliff deal, which still remains to be made. If no deal is made by Congress by March, then there will be massive cuts to US military spending. And it's thought that perhaps the defence sector was reacting to this, planning ahead perhaps.
OK, well, after all that, perhaps not surprisingly, a bit of a wobble on the markets.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a tough session in Asia, but things obviously just wrapping up there. Let's take a look at how the markets are closing. And a mixed end. The Hang Seng down the furthest at 0.4% down. We've heard from All Nippon Airways, actually, in Japan. They've announced that their sales were hit by $15 million due to problems with the grounded 787 Dreamliner airline from Boeing. So that's having an effect on their bottom line, obviously. Let's take a look at how things are in Europe. And it's early days yet, but things are heading the same way in this early trading session. We've just had some results as well through today. It's the end of the month. We're getting quite a few company results through. Here we can see a few of the biggest. Santander, the Spanish bank, 2.2 billion euros in profits, but down 59%. Wow. And other big companies in a similar sort of way. Royal Dutch Shell, the oil company, down 14%, and AstraZeneca, the drugs firm, down 37% for the whole of 2012.
Now, their results showed they needed a miracle, and BlackBerry is hoping for a bit of a turnaround in fortune with the introduction of 2 new flagship phones and a new operating system next Wednesday. But can the Canadian company, formerly known as Research in Motion, pull it off? Caterina Vitozzi takes a look.
Goodbye, Research in Motion. Now it's simply BlackBerry.
From this point forward, RIM becomes BlackBerry.
Along with the rebrand, the launch of the Z10 and the Q10, 2 new-look smartphones that BlackBerry hope will lift their fortunes.
I think the devices are going to give new life to the brand. There's this idea that BlackBerry's back. We've been innovating, and now we're going to be back in the market with these new devices and this new user experience. But it's not clear to me that 2 devices alone are going to be sufficient to reverse RIM's fortunes in a hyper-competitive marketplace, at least in the near term.
Over the past 3 years, BlackBerry has lost ground to rivals Apple and Samsung, as well as Android devices. Their market shares dived since its dominance in 2008. Last year, 80% of smartphones sold in the US were made by Android or Apple.
If they don't get a lot of sales and they don't get people to buy BlackBerry 10s, the Z10 and the Q10 in fairly big numbers, they don't have enough money on hand to compete head-to-head with Apple or Samsung for very long.
The Canadian company won't want to follow Palm's example. The first leader of the smartphone market back in 2005 was discontinued 6 years later after being bought out by Hewlett-Packard.
Right, we're taking you to Zimbabwe now, in fact. The finance minister making a rather startling admission.
Yeah, Tendai Biti has announced that only $217 remained in the country's current account after the salaries were taken out for government employees by the end of last month. Really surprising, even for a country which is in particularly difficult economic dire straits. Yeah. But he did surprise reporters by going on to say that the reporters, were likely to have a better bank balance than the state itself. The next day, I should add that $30 million in revenue was was added into the state coffers, and they do say that they are doing all right. But the minister himself said that this was rather taken out of context, this surprising quote, and he said it, in fact, to make clear that Zimbabwe is going to find it very difficult to finance elections, which are coming up in the next few months, and they are going to be asking for international donations. So that's the point he was trying to make by announcing this.
OK, hope it works for them. Now, next, raising taxes has been part of the government's agenda here in France recently, but according to one report, the biggest tax dodger could be the French state itself, apparently.
Yes, in a rather ironic state of affairs, because, of course, multinationals have been coming under fire both here in France and in the UK in recent months for their tax affairs, using offshore havens, etc., to try and avoid corporate tax. However, according to a report by a Dutch newspaper, 19 big French companies have been using shell companies in the Netherlands, and many of them have massive holdings by the French government. In particular, EDF, which of course is majority owned by the French state, GDF, Suez, Thales, France Telecom, Renault, you name it, all the big companies you might have heard of from France all seem to be in there. So it is the French state which is of course benefiting perhaps from this form of tax avoidance.
Sneaky old France. And speaking of tax affairs, Belgium, in fact, of course, has become known as a refuge for French millionaires seeking to escape high taxes. The actor Gérard Depardieu and France's richest man, Bernard Arnault, a latest high-profile Frenchman to move over the border there. But for ordinary Belgians not paying top tax rate, it turns out that France is actually a better deal. Caterina Vitozzi explains.
Some come for the good wine, food and weather. But as more and more Belgians relocate to the south of France, there's an added fiscal attraction too. Virginie de Potter moved to France 2 years ago. She opened a restaurant and employs 2 staff.
It's more expensive to hire people in Belgium than here.
Payroll tax isn't the only thing lower in France. Income tax for lower and middle income earners is easier on the pocket too. Both countries have a progressive tax system. When you earn more, you pay more tax. But the French tax rate starts and ends lower, 5.5 to 45%, as opposed to a starting tax rate of 25% in Belgium, going up to 50%. That means a person who takes home €3,000 a month will pay per year €4,150 in France, but more than double that in Belgium. This Franco-Belgian company chose to base themselves in France. The tax advantages makes it easier for them to attract young Belgian engineers to work for them.
If I do the same job, for the same salary for a company based on the other side of the border, I'll take home about 10% less money each month.
So why the recent high-profile tax exiles to Belgium? Because the country has easier policies for the very rich. There's no wealth or capital gains tax, making it, for some, a more attractive option than France.
And Stuart, we're going to end with a bit of a breath of fresh air, and it'll cost you 60 euro cents, actually, please.
OK.
If you don't mind, because that is what one Beijing entrepreneur is charging for air in a can.
Air in a can?
If you can believe it. I mean, incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
But if we, of course, we've been seeing those pictures of the smog in Beijing, and he admits this is a bit of a gimmick to draw attention to the ridiculous plight that people are having, getting access to fresh air, as it were. He's selling them, though. He is selling them for 60 euro cents, 5 yuan, and he claims that 8 million cans have been sold in the last 10 days.
And they all stink of beer as well, probably inside. Well, thank you very much. Will Edwards with the Business on France 24. Lorna's got the latest news after the break. Do stay with us.